There's a hole in the desert that cost more than $1 billion. And it's not even finished yet. Not a metaphor, an actual hole. Dug into the sand on the banks of Dubai Creek, surrounded by scaffolding that's been sitting largely idle, next to a crane that went up in 2016 and hasn't moved meaningfully since. The project was supposed to be the tallest structure ever built by human hands. A tower so tall, it would make the Burj Khalifa look modest. Instead, what you've got is a multi-billion-dollar reminder that ambition and physics don't always negotiate well. And the story of why, the real why, not the PR-approved version, involves sand chemistry, financial architecture, geopolitical tremors, and a construction philosophy that maybe never fully reckoned with what it means to build. Something impossible in a place that wasn't designed to hold it. That's what we're getting into today. To understand why this tower is failing, you have to understand the psychology of the city that built it. Dubai didn't grow the way most cities grow. Most cities accumulate. They layer decades of infrastructure, culture, and economic necessity on top of each other until something recognizable emerges over generations. Dubai compressed that process into about 30 years. What would have taken London or New York a century, Dubai did in the time it takes a child to finish school and start their career. And in that kind of environment, the tallest building isn't just a building. It's a statement of legitimacy. It's proof to foreign investors, to global media, to the world, that this place is real, that the money is real, that the future is being built right here. The Burj Khalifa did that job brilliantly. When it opened in 2010, it reset what people thought was structurally achievable. It said, "We don't follow the curve, we define it." So when the Dubai Creek Tower was announced in 2016, designed to surpass 1,300 meters, which would make it taller than anything currently standing, by a significant margin, it wasn't just an engineering project. It was Dubai making the same statement again, louder. The problem is that saying something louder doesn't change what's underneath your feet. Here's the part nobody puts in the press release. Dubai is built on some of the most geologically hostile land on Earth for tall structures. Now, that sounds dramatic, so let me be precise about what I mean, because this isn't about Dubai being reckless. It's about the specific engineering challenge that desert coastal environments present, and why those challenges scale exponentially as buildings get taller. The ground beneath Dubai is primarily a mix of loose aeolian sand, that's wind-deposited sand, over layers of weak sandstone, and in many coastal areas, sabkha. Sabkha is a salt flat formation. It's essentially sand that's been repeatedly saturated with saline groundwater and dried out over thousands of years, which creates a crust on top but leaves subsurface layers that are chemically unstable. When you introduce fresh water, additional load, or excavation, sabkha can lose its bearing capacity in ways that are extremely difficult to predict from surface surveys alone. The Dubai Creek area specifically sits in a zone where historical tidal influence has created exactly this kind of layered unpredictability. Engineers know this. They've known it for decades. The Burj Khalifa's team spent years on geotechnical surveys before a single cubic meter of concrete was poured. But here's the scale problem. The Burj Khalifa's foundation system involves roughly 192 piles, each about 1.5 meters in diameter, driven down to 50 meters below ground level. That foundation alone cost hundreds of millions of dollars to design and execute. It was, at the time, one of the most sophisticated foundation systems ever built. The Creek Tower would need to go deeper, and wider, and with more precision. Because at 1,300 plus meters, you're not just doubling the Burj Khalifa's engineering challenge, you're multiplying it in ways that aren't linear. When engineers talk about bearing capacity, they mean the maximum load a soil type can hold before it starts to deform or fail. For most conventional buildings, this is a relatively manageable calculation. But with super tall structures, and super tall in engineering terms means anything above 300 meters, while the Creek Tower was targeting more than 4 times that, the forces involved aren't just vertical. There's lateral loading from wind. There's torsional stress. There's the dynamic behavior of a structure that, at those heights, actually sways measurably in response to atmospheric pressure changes. all of that force ultimately converges at the base. Now imagine trying to anchor something like that in ground that has variable chemical composition, that may have pockets of Sabka at depths that weren't fully mapped, that sits adjacent to a tidal waterway that affects groundwater levels seasonally. The engineering isn't impossible, let me be clear about that. Human ingenuity is extraordinary, and the teams working on projects like this are among the most skilled in the world. But there's a reason that even by 2019, after years of site preparation, the foundation work had reportedly encountered complications that pushed both timelines and cost projections significantly. The interesting thing about super tall tower foundations is that all the most critical and expensive work happens where cameras can't go. The hole you see is the visible part. The real story is what's happening 50, 60, 70 meters below it. And when that story gets complicated, when you're re-drilling, retesting, redesigning reinforcement, the costs don't add up linearly. They compound. But here's the thing about mega towers. They don't fail structurally first. They fail financially. The ground can be difficult. The engineering can be brutally complex. But experienced construction firms deal with difficult ground all the time. What they can't as easily absorb is a funding gap that opens while they're mid-excavation. The Creek Tower project was announced jointly by Amar Properties and a Dubai government development entity. The initial cost estimate floated publicly was in the neighborhood of $1 billion, though independent analysts at the time suggested the real figure, fully delivered, would be considerably higher. Some estimates put the realistic completion cost closer to $3 to $4 billion when you factor in the foundation complexity, the engineering challenges. At those heights and the sheer duration of a project that, optimistically, was looking at a decade-plus timeline. Then 2019 happened, and 2020. The regional economic recalibrations, COVID-19 shutting down global capital flows and construction supply chains. All of that landed on a project that was already in its most financially vulnerable phase, the foundation stage. That's when you're spending maximum money with zero visible return. The building isn't rising. The site looks like a hole. Investors and stakeholders can start to get nervous. There's a specific phenomenon in mega project finance called the commitment escalation trap. Essentially, once a project of this scale is announced and initial capital is deployed, there's enormous institutional pressure to continue even when the financial logic for doing so has shifted. Stopping is expensive. Admitting the original projections were optimistic is politically and reputationally costly. So projects continue to absorb capital in a maintenance mode, keeping the site active, keeping the narrative alive, without the genuine momentum needed to make real progress. Whether that's precisely what's happening at the Creek Tower, site, only the people inside those meetings know for certain. But the observable pattern fits that profile closely. The Creek Tower was designed by Spanish architect Santiago Calatrava, whose work tends toward the sculptural and biomorphic. The design was striking, tapered, with a cable-supported structure that some compared to a botanical form. Calatrava's portfolio includes genuinely extraordinary structures, but his projects also have a documented history of cost overruns and engineering complications across multiple continents. These aren't failures of vision. They're cases where visual ambition and practical construction timelines have sometimes diverged significantly. For the Creek Tower specifically, what's been reported includes excavation complications related to subsurface conditions, foundation redesign requirements, delays in procurement of specialized construction materials, and, following the pandemic, a broader reassessment of the entire Dubai Creek Harbour Master Plan timeline. None of this has been described officially as a failure. The project hasn't been cancelled. It exists in that uncomfortable space that large, politically significant projects sometimes occupy, technically ongoing, practically stalled. And that space, honestly, is more revealing than either a triumphant completion or a clean cancellation would be. This isn't a one-off story. It's actually a recurring pattern in Gulf mega-project development. The Gulf region went through a period of extraordinary oil revenue-fueled ambition. In the 2000s and early 2010s, where the announcement of a project was essentially the product itself. The announcement generated international media coverage, investor interest, and diplomatic prestige. Whether the project completed on time or at all was almost secondary. There's a consistent pattern of announcement as spectacle that isn't dishonest exactly. The Tawe intention is often genuine, but that underestimates the gap between ambition and execution in ways that only become visible years later. What makes Dubai different is that Dubai has actually delivered on its mega project promises more consistently than almost anywhere else in the region. The Burj Khalifa is real, and it's extraordinary. The Palm Jumeirah is real. The Dubai Mall is the most visited retail destination on the planet. Dubai has a track record that makes you expect the impossible to actually happen. Which is exactly why the Creek Tower stall is significant. When the city that proved these things are possible hits a wall, or more accurately, hits a particularly challenging patch of Sabkha, it tells you something important about the outer edge of what's achievable. There's a psychological cost to this that goes beyond the balance sheet. Cities, like people, build their identity around their aspirations as much as their achievements. Dubai's entire modern narrative is one of refusing to accept physical or financial limitations, of responding to every that's impossible with a crane and a construction crew. That identity isn't just marketing. It's deeply embedded in how the city's leadership thinks, how its residents feel, and how it presents itself to a world that remains genuinely astonished by what it's already built. A stalled super tall tower, sitting visibly at the entrance to one of Dubai's most prominent development zones, creates a quiet tension with that narrative. It doesn't break it. Dubai has too many genuine achievements for one delayed project to undermine the broader story. But it does ask a question that cities at this stage of development eventually have to reckon with. What happens after you've already built the impossible? What do you reach for next when the Burj Khalifa is already there? The Creek Tower was supposed to be the answer. A new superlative, a new statement. For now, it's a very expensive question mark. So here's what $1 billion hole in the desert actually teaches us. And I think this lands beyond architecture, beyond engineering, beyond Dubai specifically. The physical constraints of the world don't negotiate with ambition. They just wait. You can announce a tower. You can render it in extraordinary detail. Publish the plans, hold the groundbreaking ceremony, and watch the global media cycle do exactly what it's designed to do. But the Sabkha underneath the surface doesn't read press releases. The groundwater doesn't respond to architectural awards. The load-bearing math doesn't care about the vision. That's not pessimistic. Actually, I find it clarifying, because what it means is that the projects that do succeed, the ones that defy what seemed possible, succeed because someone did the slow, unglamorous, enormously expensive work of actually solving the physical problems. The Burj Khalifa stands because someone spent years figuring out exactly what those 192 piles needed to do, and then executed it with extraordinary precision. The glory of the finished tower sits on top of that invisible foundation work. The Creek Tower might still get built. The engineering problems are solvable, given enough time and capital. The question is whether the financial and political will holds long enough to do the work properly, and whether, in a city that's always looking towards the next thing, there's still appetite to finish the last thing. Either way, watching this story unfold in real time is genuinely fascinating, because it sits at the intersection of human ambition, physical reality, and what happens when a city reaches the edge of its own mythology. If this kind of deep dive, where we actually pull back the curtain on why extraordinary things succeed or fall apart, is something you want more of, then subscribing keeps you in the loop when the next one drops. There's a lot more in this world that deserves a closer look than it's getting. Stay curious.